Hey, this is Pastor Matt, and welcome to Theology Thursday. And today we are asking the question, who is my neighbor? And as we answer that question, we're going to look at the parable that we're going to talk about on Sunday. The passage begins with this guy who he's a lawyer, he's an expert in the law, and he stands up and he tries to entrap Jesus. And he says to him, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus says, "Oh, you're trying to trap me. Okay, well, I'm going to trap you." He asks him, "All right, lawyer, you're so smart in the law. What's written in it? How do you read it?" And the guy answers, "Well, okay, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart and with all of your soul, with all of your strength and with all of your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus says to him, "Bravo, you got it, buddy. You've answered correctly. Do this and you will live." And the trap is set. Because this guy is thinking about it. It's like, okay, well, love my neighbor as myself. I better put a limit as to who is my neighbor. All right, Jesus, who is my neighbor? And Jesus replies, okay, let's put it in a story. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers. And not only did they take his money, but they stripped him, they beat him, and when they left him half dead. So this guy's hosed. He's got no hope. He needs someone to come help him. And the thing that we're kind of expecting is that someone from the temple is going to come and do something good to help this guy. They're going to treat him as their neighbor, as their problem to deal with. It doesn't happen though, because by chance a priest is going down that road. Must have just been coming from Jerusalem or going to Jerusalem to do his temple work. And when he saw this guy, he passed by on the other side. Maybe he was worried, if he touches a dead person, he isn't going to be able to perform the ceremonial work for a while. There's even kind of a practice at this point that if even your shadow passed over a corpse, you would be ceremonially unclean for a while. Maybe this guy's worried and he's like, you know what? I'm too busy. I am a preacher and I have a sermon to deliver. This person can't get in my way. Not my problem. Well, okay, strike one. So likewise, a Levite, a guy who's also working in the temple system, kind of in an administrative capacity probably. This guy, he came to the place and he saw this guy and he also passed by on the other side. And okay, strike two. The guy's also probably busy. We don't know why he decided he can't help out this poor guy, but he decided he also wasn't his problem. And at this point, we're kind of left wondering, oh, okay, I wonder who is going to help him. Jesus isn't going to leave us in a bad story. Maybe it's just going to be a normal Israelite. A normal person from Israel is going to step up, carry on his civilian role, and do a good deed. If the temple has an issue, hopefully that can be reformed. But at least help's going to come from Israel, right? Nope. But a Samaritan, someone that the Jews often thought of as half-breeds, cultists, people who didn't worship right. They didn't worship at the temple in Jerusalem. They worshiped at Mount Gerizim. These people, they hated each other. A Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where this guy was. And when he saw him, he felt pity on him. He had compassion. His heart was all turned up inside. And he went to him and he bound up his wounds, his trauma. And he poured on oil and wine, likely as like an antiseptic. I don't encourage you to go take your bottle of wine and like pour it on stuff. Different practices, guys. We got better stuff than that. But anyways, he does this. And then he sets him on his own animal and he brings him to an inn and he takes care of him. And then not only does he do that, not only has he made this guy his problem to deal with, but he then goes and he says, "Here, take these 2 denarii, innkeeper, and I want you to take care of him. And if you need to spend more than that, whatever you spend it, and I will repay you when I come back." So the Jewish leadership of the temple doesn't come through. The administration of the temple doesn't come through. The regular servants of the temple doesn't come through. And who ends up coming through for him? An enemy, someone who is disreputable in Jews' eyes, someone who isn't one of their own. That's the person who comes through. And not only does he come through, but he is so abundantly generous. And so then Jesus asks this, religious law expert, so which of these three do you think proved to be a neighbor? Or another way to say it, which of these three became a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? And you know what? This guy, he can't even say it. He can't even say the Samaritan. He says, I suppose the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said to him, okay, now you go and do likewise. And now, one of the interesting things with this parable is that Jesus answers the man's question, who is my neighbor, not with a noun, but with a verb. He effectively is saying, listen, if you're asking who is my neighbor, you are absolutely asking the wrong question. Instead, you should be asking, how can I be a neighbor? And then you live your life trusting God to lead you into relationships with people to be a good neighbor to. And I think that message is so incredibly important for us today, because as connected as the ancient world was, we are very connected with each other. The way that we buy things, the way that we source materials affects people around the world. The policies that we vote for, they affect people around the world. Like, all the things that we do have a way further reach than what we initially think they have. Even the way that we care for the environment is affecting our neighbors who are going to live here, hundreds of years after us, provided AI doesn't destroy us all. Our tendency is to group together and only care for a select number of people. But this world is way too complicated to get by doing that. We are affecting other people. And so we really ought to be good neighbors, not just to the people who are like us, but to the people that God has placed into our paths. And so rather than wasting time asking, who is my neighbor? Ask, how can I be a good neighbor? And the example that Jesus gives is what the Samaritan did for this guy who's lost on the road. He loved him as he loved himself. That's how you be a good neighbor. You see someone in need and you think, if I was in their spot, what would I hope someone would do for me? And you do that. Jesus is saying to us, don't play that game of trying to figure out what people are more worthy of your care than others. Don't do that. That's just trying to find an excuse for why they aren't your neighbor and they don't need your care and they're not your problem. Don't do that. And instead, Jesus is telling us, he's inviting us to be less concerned with who your neighbor is and more with how you can be a good neighbor. Why? Because that's what Jesus did for us. He was less concerned with who he bore a responsibility to and more with who needed him. He cared less about what it would cost him if he helped us and more about what it would cost us if he didn't help us. And so really, when Jesus calls us to be good neighbors and to not be so worried about who our neighbors are, he's inviting us to be more like him. Now, I know this is it's a complicated thing. There's probably a lot of questions you have, like, what do I do with someone when I see them on the side of the road? How do I be a good neighbor to someone who isn't accepting of my help? How can I be a good neighbor to those who are around the world and within my own home? Like, how do I do those things? We can talk about some of those on Sunday when we consider this passage more and we have our discussion groups after the sermon. But for today, I want you to just ask yourself, not who is my neighbor, but rather, how am I currently being a neighbor to other people? So ask yourself that. And if you have any insight on that or any concerns with that, bring them to church on Sunday and we can talk through those. But that's all for Theology Thursday for this week. Thanks for joining and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.